Hey everybody, it's Steven from Asian Boss. By now, most of you might be aware that Shanghai is under a strict lockdown due to the worst COVID outbreak since Wuhan at the beginning of the pandemic. That's a city of over 25 million people we're talking about. We really wanted to get the locals' perspective on this issue, but we're frustrated that we couldn't conduct any street interviews in Shanghai under current circumstances. However, one of our citizen reporters from Shanghai actually reached out to us because her videos on TikTok about the whole situation have been absolutely blowing up and getting a lot of Western media attention. So what's her story and what exactly is happening in Shanghai, at least from her perspective? Let's get right to it. Hey Shanice, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
I suppose for context, we need to explain how this interview actually came about. You are an American living in Shanghai at the moment, correct?
Yes.
And you actually make a lot of TikTok videos that has gone viral. And, you know, I understand that a lot of people wanted to get in touch with you. So could you just explain how this whole thing worked out and why you decided to talk to us?
Yeah, so I just wanted to do like simple vlogs on what was going on here, you know, with my situation. And it was supposed to kind of be, you know, lighthearted, you know, kind of just showing the process of going from being in lockdown to coming out of lockdown and how to kind of like how COVID-0 works in China, because I think a lot of people don't really understand. Yeah, so my video ended up going viral. I think it has 7 million views now. And then I have 2 other videos that have gotten over 1 million views. So it's like there seems to be extra waves that are coming in the more the news talks about it. But I had a lot of media reach out to me, like very big networks. And I didn't feel very comfortable talking to them because they kind of have their own narrative, right? How they want to present what's going on here. And I would spend a lot of time talking to people, and you can kind of tell when they kind of have their own idea of, you know, what they want you to say. They want to guide you to say certain things, and I just didn't feel comfortable with that. So I was like, if I'm going to do any type of interview, I want it to be, you know, fairly objective, non-biased type media where they're presenting the information as you're giving it instead of trying to kind of mold it into whatever they want, I guess.
We appreciate that you thought of us because, like, obviously that's what we do. But, you know, just for the record, we do want to make it clear that we actually once interviewed you in the middle of the street. Yeah, I think it was, the video was about, like, what's it like, you know, being black in China or something.
Yes.
And so, you know, it's just obviously good to see you again.
Yeah.
But when you talk about this whole, like, mainstream media narrative, like I'm assuming you're referring to mainly Western media outlets, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so how do you know that they have this like a certain agenda or things like that? Because I mean, I'm sure they're professional journalists.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely are professional journalists, but for example, there's one interview I did and I think I talked to them for 15 minutes. And they took like a 3-second clip of something that I said.
Oh, man.
That was probably the most dramatic thing that I said, and I didn't even say anything that dramatic. So I saw that interview and I was like, oh, I don't want, like, I was just, after that interview, I decided to not interview with anybody else. So I just started ignoring a lot of messages, to be quite honest.
Obviously with us, you can just talk about whatever you want and we're not going to cut anything out. So, I mean, that's not what we do. So how long have you been living in China and why are you there?
So I've been here for about eight years, maybe 8.5, coming up 8.5 now. I majored in Chinese and I wanted to come here and learn Chinese. Like that was my main reason for majoring in Chinese. I did a study abroad. I really enjoyed China and I wanted to come back. So originally I was supposed to do translation and then move to the States and just, you know, continue doing translation there as a job. But I just found a lot of opportunity here in China. So I just stayed.
What's like your overall impression of this whole 2 years been? Because I think when you mentioned China has a zero COVID policy, like could you just explain to people what that means?
So the COVID-0 policy, it does not mean if there's 1 or 2 cases, they shut down the entire city. I think that's what people are thinking. People were like, oh, you must have been in lockdown this whole time. And I'm like, no, this is the first time Shanghai has been in lockdown. What COVID-0 means is if there's any slight uptick, they start clamping down. Doesn't have to be lockdown. It can just be there's more mask mandates, or they start doing more temperature checks, or they ask to see your health code in certain areas. So that's what it's mostly been for us. So over the past 2 years, we've essentially been in a COVID-free bubble. I mean, there have been some cases of COVID, but not any huge spikes. If there's like 7 cases, people would say, put on your masks, don't go out that much, just for a few cases. So people just take it really seriously here.
Since we are doing a lot of street interviews in Shanghai, at least up until recently, we noticed that it's such a bubble that people don't even need to wear masks anymore. At least this was before what was happening, before the lockdown. But what actually has changed? I know there's Omicron now, and that it just resulted in like just a sharp spike in COVID cases. But from your perspective, could you just explain how did this whole thing came about? So this would have been like a few weeks back, but what happened?
So cases started increasing probably around, I feel like in February, even before the Lunar New Year, we saw an increase in cases. And I remember around that time, I was told, you have the option to work from home. You don't need to work in the office just in case. At that time, they were doing more isolated lockdowns. So there's actually a running joke that they locked down a bubble tea shop with people inside of it. And you couldn't leave. I think there was a clothing store. They also locked people inside of it. But it was sort of like, all right, you had to stay there while they tested everyone. If you didn't have it, then, obviously they let you go. They're not going to make you stay there. I don't know if the process took a day or 2 days, but it was just enough to test everyone. And so it was just all of these sporadic lockdowns going on. It seemed like they were trying to do a more lenient approach to locking down the whole city. It seemed like locking down the whole city was either not an option or plan D.
Right.
We were kind of confused because the cases kept going up. And I think starting from beginning of March, they really started increasing. And we were kind of so are they going to lock down the city? And every day it was just wondering why they hadn't locked down the city yet. And one day they just locked it down immediately. There was no real warning. I mean, I kind of feel like if you were following the cases, you knew that a lockdown was impending, though they did say there was not going to be a lockdown. Technically, Shanghai is not locked down completely. You can still enter Shanghai and you can still leave because Shanghai is so important to China and it's so important to other countries as well. It's it makes up most of China's GDP. So I think that's one of the reasons they didn't want to shut it down, because it would cost so much in terms of the economy.
Right. But they clearly did take that drastic measure. So when that happened, and when you say that there wasn't no prior warning or notice, other than you just sort of looking at the numbers going up, and then you feel like something's going to happen, surely they must make some sort of a public announcement or things of that nature, no?
They did make a public announcement. I mean, in terms of the cases, you could see that they were rising. But in terms of the public announcement, it was literally a few hours before they locked down half of the city. So they locked down, so Shanghai is divided in half by a long river. Part of it is Pudong, part of it is Puxi. Pudong is where most of the cases were happening. So I feel like they gave them 4 hours. I can't remember the exact time, but it was very, very little time, because I remember that night everyone was running to the grocery store and they were at the store for, till 1 and 2 in the morning trying to get groceries.
And so there's the Pudong side and there's the Puxi side. Where were you?
I was in Puxi. I was one of the lucky ones, yeah.
What did you do when you hear that type of public announcement that, hey, the city is going into lockdown and we are talking about over 25 million people? Is that something that you saw coming yourself? And then what did you do?
I saw it coming because even before it locked down, I was kind of stocking up, groceries as much as I could, a lot of the fresh produce, because that's what goes when there's a lockdown, not all the convenience foods, but all of the fresh produce. So I tried to stock up some of that as much as I could. And as soon as Pudong locked down, I knew it was going to be much harder because everybody saw those videos of people ransacking the supermarkets. They made it much harder in Puxi. They started closing a lot of the supermarkets, or starting to close down. I think they wanted to prevent what had happened in Pudong because there were so many people clustered together trying to get food.
And so, you could understand that from the outsider's perspective. Even me, I've never been to Shanghai or anything like that. So you could imagine that people might see that as a very drastic move, where like, how do you expect people to sort of go into lockdown? Maybe they don't even have enough food. They're not as well prepared as you are. So I don't know, do they give you some sort of like a guideline? You get visit from government officials or something like that?
No, it was sort of like people were just trying to get what they could. And as soon as it locked down, it was just locked down. Now people are at home and they have to figure out, how am I going to get food? How's this going to work? And I think it was later on that we realized they were going to start sending out food. So they showed the images of all of the trucks coming to bring food, because people were hoarding at that point. People asked me if there was a shortage. There wasn't a shortage. There was just people taking much more than they actually needed.
Right.
Because Shanghai was not locked down, places from around Shanghai could bring vegetables into Shanghai. So they were trying to do kind of the system of giving everybody just sit tight, we'll bring all the food to you, kind of that feeling.
And when you did go into lockdown, and let's say you have enough food, but that a lot of people don't have enough food, like how long did you think this whole lockdown was going to last? At least like a week or two, or did you anticipate much longer?
They told us 4 days. So, okay. Yeah, people were told just get enough food for 4 days. So the hope is that most people got at least that. I thought maybe a week, 2 tops, because this is not the first time that a city in China has had to lock down over this new variant. It's happened before. It happened in Shenzhen, and there are also cases in Jilin. At least Shenzhen, from what I saw, they got it under control fairly quickly. So I was thinking, everybody else was thinking, Shanghai is one of the, the bigger, it's the economic center of China. They have a lot of money, a lot of resources. So we felt that they would do a better job. Not necessarily a better job, but at least as good a job as some of these other areas. And that it seemed things kind of started to get quite messy and to drag out longer. So now we don't know. I feel like before I was like, okay, yeah, a week, 2 weeks. Now I'm like, I don't know, maybe another month. Like I'm not really sure, to be quite honest.
So just to double check, you can't like get delivery, for example, right? You cannot have food delivered.
So especially in the beginning, what a lot of people were doing is they were using food apps to buy food. But because everybody's using them, the system is clogged. So you would see there's videos on, the TikTok app here that was, how to successfully get food on the app. And it was basically just clicking buttons over and over and over again until you could get in the system. So people were like, oh, I did it for 15 minutes, I did it for 30 minutes. I do it every day. I'm never able to get anything. So there was a huge issue with that because now delivery drivers are in lockdown, supermarkets are closed.
Right.
It was kind of like, oh my God, like how are we supposed to get food? So that's when we kind of had this new communal idea called, I call it group buy, I'm not sure what else to call it, but essentially different buildings and different compounds. So compounds, it's sort of like a gated community. There's people in charge and they just will contact a supermarket or a store and they arrange, a package item of food, like different vegetables, and you need to order it for a certain number of people. So it's like, at least 50 people need to buy this, and then they'll send it all to you at once because there's just not as much opportunity for delivery drivers to go to multiple locations. So it's more efficient to just get a big order and send it to one area at a time.
And I'm sure, things work a lot differently in China culturally from, let's say, people living in America or something like that. But, when people are told that, hey, you need to go into lockdown and then, you don't have enough food, obviously human tendency is just like, you know what, fuck this, I'm just going to go out. So what happens if you actually go outside?
So it's different. I think when I talk to people about this, they assume at least Shanghai is like a very cohesive, organized city where everything applies to every area. It's actually not. It's very spread out. So you have different districts. So first we're divided in Pudong and Puxi. Then you have different districts within each area. And within those districts, you have sub-districts, which are governed by neighborhood committees. So neighborhood committee is essentially like a grassroots type of organization. It's supposed to provide service to the people, and it's closest to the people. Then within that, you have different compounds, right? So the different gated communities. And within that, you have different buildings. So different buildings might be more strict than other buildings. Different compounds might be more strict than other compounds. Different neighborhood committees might be more strict than other neighborhood committees. The most important trend is if they have a lot of positive cases, they're much more strict. Yeah, because they don't want it to spread around. Whereas if there's more negative cases, you know, it might be more lenient. But the other thing is neighbors are checking on each other. So it's not like you need some big authority figure to come and say, hey, go back inside. Somebody will take a picture out their window and send it into the group like, hey, I saw this person outside, right? And then people will send a message like, hey, stay inside, you know, or they'll tell the building leader. So we have, you know, someone who's in charge of the buildings. They have to talk to that person and say, you know, you can't be outside. So very discombobulated. Everything is not really connected together.
Right. But then again, you know, if it's done at a sort of like a community level, like by the building owner or something, it's still like, you know, if you're like, what are they going to do? If you go outside, are they going to like try to fine you or something? Because we even saw a, like there's a video going around with this like a robot dog, just like patrolling the street with the with a speakerphone. Have you seen that video?
I've seen that video. I have not seen or heard anybody talk about that. The most I've seen is like the drone video.
So clearly they're monitoring to make sure that there's nobody on the street. But what if you get caught? Like what's the consequence that you're gonna face? Like for example, if you were to go out right now, what's gonna happen?
So in my area, they probably will just say, go back inside. Like, hey, go back. And also me as a foreigner, I have to like follow the rules more because especially in Shanghai, foreigners are kind of known for being like reckless and, you know, we don't care about COVID and, you know, we're more likely to break the rules. So I try to be like, you know, super follow the rules. But yeah, generally, I mean, you might just get a warning like, hey, go back in. And if you still don't go in, you know, maybe they'll get more volunteers to come out and be like, you know, maybe like, I don't know if they'll like physically try to like, you know, push, you know, hey, go back in. I saw one where it's like a megaphone and in Chinese it's saying, go home, go home, go home, go home. So trying to annoy them to go home. And then sometimes the police, they'll call the police. And I think they use police as a threat. Like, hey, if you don't go inside, I'm gonna call the police. They don't actually want to call the police, but in some areas they'll call the police and now you have to deal with the police officers like trying to get you to go back inside. I don't know if anyone's been detained or like jailed for that. I think it's more serious if you refuse to take a test. They rolled out policies to be more strict because they didn't have that at first, but after the lockdown, they were more strict about that. I think you could get fined like 500 RMB, which is like $60, $70, something like that. And then it could be up to 7 years in jail or in detention.
Wow. Now you've just been at home, but then again, I see your TikTok videos and you do a very good job of like narrating and curating this whole thing, that you could actually be seen going outside as well, or was that before the lockdown?
Okay, so there are videos where I'm outside. So most of the videos are right before lockdown, where I'm outside. And then the ones where you see me later outside during the lockdown, that's because we're doing testing outside. So you're allowed to come outside when we do testing, but we go right back in. So we can't even really like enjoy it or anything.
Right. And then you do a quick test, and then how do they notify you if you do test positive? And what happens if you do test positive? Do they just like drag you out or something, or?
Yeah, okay. So if you test positive, usually, well, so far from what I've heard, it doesn't show up in the system. So it won't say you're positive. It will say like uploading or like under review for a really long time. So people say no news is good news. So if they don't call you or you don't get any message, then you're fine. They do batch testing. So they'll test like a group of 20 people at a time. And if there's an abnormal result, they come back and test each person individually with a PCR test. So I got a call and it was like, there was an abnormal test result in your batch, so we need to come test you. And they came like that night, like a few hours later, and gave me an individual test. Then later, it took a long time for me to get news about that, but again, no news is good news, so I didn't get any calls after that. Yeah. So they do that. Then if you test positive, it's the same thing. They'll call you and they'll say, hey, you've tested positive. You're going to have to go to a quarantine facility. And they give you time to prepare. So they don't like pick you up right away. They can't. There's too many people. They'll say, hey, get your stuff ready and we'll pick you up at this time. And based on the stories that I've seen, they don't come on time. They usually come much later. So anyway, they get you and you get checked in to a facility and then you have to stay there until you test negative.
And when you talk about these facilities, is it like a special government facilities that is like this, like a giant, I don't know, factory like type of place, or have you seen any of these like quarantine facilities?
Yes, I have. So a lot of facilities that I've seen, it's like a huge stadium, and they just have lots and lots of beds. I think they're separated generally by 2 people in each separator, but it's not a wall that goes all the way up, so you can kind of see everyone. But I think someone said it's like being at Coachella or something. So like you have lots of bathrooms. Like I think one area showed a bunch of porta potties. They didn't have showers in the ones that I saw. They have recent ones now that have showers in them and they look like much fancier. So I don't know what they're doing with those, but the ones that I saw that look pretty standard, just like they'd have like kind of like an end table, not really fancy, like kind of made out of plastic, and have like a little bucket with a towel, toothbrush, some small necessities that you might need.
Is it almost in a way better to be in a quarantine facility because at least they feed you there, and you don't have to like starve to death? What do you think about that?
I've actually seen comments where people were like people who are really scared and saying, oh, I have to go, and like, I don't know, posting videos. People are like, is it really that bad? Like you get 3 meals a day and you don't have to like worry about getting a call to go because you're already there. But yeah, I mean, I think the biggest complaint I saw, at least on the end of foreigners, is that they just said it, was kind of dirty. The bed was not like so comfortable. It's very loud. People are talking all day. The lights stay on. So I don't know, maybe they're trying to address those issues now, but I mean, they were really doing this pretty quickly. So I wouldn't expect it to be like super amazing. And it's temporary, but I guess some people kind of use it as a way to, I don't know, hang out with people, make friends, the people who are there.
What's surprising to us from like an observational point of view is that you really seem to be like taking this in stride, as in you're not like freaking out or it's like, oh my God, I've been locked down for weeks now. And if you just look at, let's say, how things are being reported in Western media, it makes it look like the sky's falling, right? And like people, but then again, to be fair, there are videos, which I'm pretty sure you've seen, of people screaming out of their apartment buildings and, so is that something that you've personally witnessed? Because the video seemed pretty legitimate. Like, there are desperate people, and of course, if you have no food, you are going to get desperate, and something has to give.
In terms of the screaming out of the windows, I didn't see that in my area. Those videos are definitely from the very beginning, and that video went viral here. So it literally translated to like the screaming building of Shanghai. it was literally just people trying to get attention, like saying in Chinese, like, we want supplies from the government, because they were sending food out, but it was not getting to everyone because there was such an issue with delivery, at least is what I speculate, because there were places getting food. I mean, we got food as well. We didn't get so many government packages, but we've been able to do the group buy with our neighbors. But there were definitely areas, I know Baoshan district is a district that was having a really hard time, and there were definitely areas in Pudong that were having a hard time. And on top of supplies not necessarily getting to people, from what I heard, there were some issues with volunteers. So people cannot leave their buildings, so they rely on volunteers to bring up the food to them. Right. So if there's volunteers who are now getting it, people are too scared to be a volunteer now you have a whole nother host of problems. And another one that I heard is, this one was recent. I had a friend and he told us he was eating 1 meal a day. And we were like, oh, is it because you're not getting enough food? They can't do group buy. And he said, oh no, I was scared that I will get the virus from the packages. So in some cases, people would tell like their neighbors and stuff, hey, try not to order so much just to minimize the, getting it from the packages. So there's so much going on in terms of people not getting enough food. It was quite chaotic.
You're saying that those screaming people, from their windows was sort of at the beginning phase, but then, is it verifiable that something maybe did happen to those people in that they either got food or they starved to death? Like, has there been any unreported case of like people starving to death?
That's actually a good question. I have not seen anything about people starving to death. If there's one thing that's pretty good here, I would say, is people spread information very quickly. And they, even if, it's being removed or, comments are being deleted, people will keep reposting and reposting and reposting. And I haven't seen any of that. What I would do is I would check, like I would type in, government supplies, and I would type in certain districts and just read the comments and see what people are saying. And I saw some comments where people were like, oh, I got my package, which I hadn't seen before in this particular district. So I was like, okay, it looks like at least some people in that area are getting food. Though I did watch a video the other day of a mother, and it's like her husband, and a child. And they have food, but it's not like a lot of food. So she kind of gave us a tour of her fridge, like half a cabbage, some noodles, some rice cakes, stuff like this, and saying, she's just been cooking noodles every day with a little bit of cabbage, and she was like, she's very worried about her daughter. So there's definitely a lot of worry about getting enough nutrition. So it's like, even if they eat enough that they won't starve to death, it's more like, but we need to be healthy, and especially people with kids, they prioritize the health of their family and their kids.
When you talk about the government supply, what kind of stuff do they have it delivered? Like, what kind of food do you get from the government?
So what we got, at first we got like a pretty good box of like vegetables, like, I don't know, I think it had like cucumber and cabbage. There's a lot of people saying I have too much cabbage. I guess they were giving a lot of cabbages in some area. Later we got like egg noodles. We got 2 big, like 1 kilo. I actually think it was more than 1 kilo. It was a pretty big bag of rice, 2 big bags of rice, 2 things of oil. And recently some of my friends are getting, we haven't gotten it yet, but it's like non-food packaging. So like laundry detergent, or I think she had toothpaste, but anyway, just stuff that's not necessarily food. Not everyone is getting the same packages. Some packages have a lot of stuff. Some packages don't have that much. Some packages, the food is not in the best condition. So there's clearly, Shanghai is also quite massive. So, I guess some areas, based on how easy it is to ship things to them, they're gonna get probably better quality of food than other areas. So that's definitely an ongoing issue.
So you pretty much haven't been outside other than those brief times that we have to get tested. Like, how are you doing, like, mentally?
I'm actually okay. We have like it's not a balcony, but it is like an area with, windows. Like fairly big windows. We can open up the window and look out. So we spend a lot of time doing that. But it was funny, I was joking with someone the other day, like, I've spent like months in my apartment and barely left but it's like mentally it changes when you can't leave. You're sort of like,
Yeah,
I actually can't go out now, even though, I might have been doing this for months, who knows. But I mean, there's a different element added onto it when you can't get deliveries. You can't order like you normally could, because at least in 2020, a lot of us, we stayed in our apartments. It wasn't mandatory lockdown. People were very scared and didn't want to leave, but we were able to get any type of food that we wanted. Delivery was not such a big deal from what I remember, or at least it like went online pretty quickly. We didn't have the issues that we're having now, so it made life a little more comfortable, because that lockdown, I mean, I think that lasted at least 2.5 months, and that wasn't really such a big deal, I remember at the time.
Well, now the situation is completely different, and again, coming back to my question, like how long do you think you can do this? Because sounds like there's no clear end in sight.
I mean, I would be very sad if it took up most of my summer, because I was looking forward to getting warmer, but maybe another month and a half, and then I'd be like, okay, this shouldn't take that long. I mean, at least from what I've seen, like even Wuhan was like 76 days. It's like, it should not take that long. There's not even that many cases in comparison to how big the city is. A lot of them are asymptomatic. There's not like a high death rate. I do understand they want to protect, a lot of the unvaccinated senior elderly population. So we're fine with that, but we're just like, there's got to be a more efficient way to do things. So we do hope, I mean, they've been changing their policies daily. I mean, at one point it was very hard to get to a hospital. For example, you had to wait in line for an ambulance for, one guy told me it was like 3-hour wait for an ambulance for him. And now they're making it so you can get taxis. So they're allowing taxis to take people to hospitals. So they are trying to improve things. But it seems like there's a lot that needs to be fixed. So
you could probably hold on for another month or so, but like, just to be clear, there hasn't been anything that was communicated, right? So you haven't heard like, oh, this is gonna be extended for another week or two. This is just like no communication at this point.
Well, the other thing is we have a 3-tier system now in terms of lockdown. So there are people, they're already outside. So in certain areas they can already leave.
Oh.
Yeah. So that's probably,
okay.
That's kind of important. So certain areas that have been deemed safe, they haven't had any cases in their immediate vicinity or in their communities, they are given a pass. So the pass allows you to go out once. One person can use it.
Right.
And you're supposed to stay in a specific area. There's one woman who was telling us about how she has it. And she was like, yeah, you can't take a scooter or a bike or a car. You can only walk. But she was like, there's no time limit, because I was reading that there's a time limit. I guess it depends. So you have those people, so they can leave their compound. Then you have another tier, which is where we can't leave the compound. So you can leave your building, but you have to stay inside your community. And then the lockdown one, which is me. So you stay in your building, you cannot leave your building.
From your perspective right now, what do you see as like the biggest issue of like, this whole thing just being handled? Because you talked about efficiency, and this is not probably the most efficient or effective way of handling it. Even Korea, for example, when it comes to Omicron, literally just let everybody get it, and all of a sudden we have like 200,000 cases per day, right? But then again, at the same time, we do have a lot of like even vaccinated elderly, like maybe over the age of 70, 80, so we have like actually hundreds of deaths per day, which is not being reported. So do you think that's like the priority for the Chinese government, to save a lot of old people? Like, what do you think the priority is?
I know in Shanghai specifically, because they were being so lenient in the beginning, I think the priority really was to kind of keep the economy going. But as the cases like went up, they probably were told like, hey, we got to lock down. Like we can't prioritize the economy right now. So I guess that's why they just mostly locked down the residents. But I do feel like, perhaps, I can only speculate, but definitely they want to protect the people, because the people here, they will hold the government accountable. So, if they just let it run loose and lots of people get sick and a lot of people die, that's going to cause issues, you know, because the people, they really depend on the government to protect them. Here in China, it's different from in other countries. People kind of debate amongst themselves, you should wear a mask, or, you know, why don't you wear a mask? It's more amongst the people. But here it's more like, you know, the government, you're supposed to protect us. And also the fact that they've boasted, you know, COVID zero for such a long time, I think they're really going to try to make it work. Also, I've heard about like mutations, so potential future mutations. I know people do say it could get better, you know, less lethal, but it could get more lethal. So that would be another issue if it starts to mutate and it has dire consequences.
I could just imagine a lot of like, you know, Western people losing their mind when you just say something like, you know, the people hold their government accountable, you know, because that's clearly not how I suppose, how it's perceived from the outside, that, you know, it's almost like the other way around, you know, the whole authoritarian way of imposing this, you know. So like, it's just so strange to hear that, obviously from somebody who's living there.
I can give an example of that. So for example, the whole children and parents being separated during quarantine. So if the kid was positive, they would separate. I mean, there was a huge uproar. I mean, so many people were reposting. They were posting videos and they were tagging media, like obviously state-run media, and saying, you need to fix this. So it wasn't like a bunch of people scared to say anything. And literally, I feel like it was 2 days, they changed it. And they said, okay, now, you know, a parent can quarantine with their child, but you have to be willing to take on the risks associated with getting COVID.
You know, I have to ask you this because there'll be a lot of like accusations even for ourselves that, you know, like, are you under some sort of like a pressure to not, you know, go in any deeper in case you get like, you know, persecuted or something like that for what you say? You know, you gotta watch what you say.
I mean, to be quite honest, I feel like I can pretty much speak out about what's going on because I'm having to deal with it. I'm seeing how people here are speaking out about it. They're not scared to talk about it. So that makes me feel comfortable, to be quite honest, because I'm like, well, people are posting it, they're tagging media agencies, they're not, you know, they're not scared of posting because they're issues that affect the people here. I kind of feel like I want to be a voice for the people who are talking about these issues. There's people in facilities, quarantine facilities, foreigners who have talked very openly to the media. I mean, they're in newspapers, they're in big publications, and they're fine. So I'm just like, if anybody would be worried about that, it might be people who are actually in, you know, kind of these quarantine facilities, because those seem to be, you know, the big driver, a lot of the fear of what's going on right now. So I feel part of it comes from seeing other people talking about it. And also as a foreigner, I'm speaking in English, I'm speaking with foreign media. It's much different from if you're here in China and you're speaking in Chinese and you're using Chinese social media. Those are two completely different things.
Even though there might be sort of inclination at our end to be skeptical of what you say, you know, the fact that you just continue to create all these TikTok videos and they haven't been banned or anything like that, you know, it sounds like that's an indication perhaps that it's okay to talk about these things.
Yeah, I mean, living here for like 8 years, you kind of get an idea of what's too sensitive to talk about. And, you know, certain things in the media that, especially, you know, abroad, they'll kind of talk about certain things, and it's just a sensitive thing. So I don't talk about those things. Like when it comes to politics, like, you know, Taiwan and mainland China, I don't get involved in that stuff. That stuff is sensitive. But I think when it comes to what's going on right now, people want to hold the government accountable for what's going on. So it's like everyone's talking at one time. So they're not going to go around and just, you know, tell everyone to be quiet, because everybody is dealing with this right now. There's too many people here. So, I mean, it's not great. I'm not going to pretend that everything's dandy. I mean, my personality is sort of like, you know, roll with the punches. I'm not going to like have a lot of high anxiety and be, you know, upset all the time because I'm in my apartment. Also, I try to emphasize to people that I'm in a very privileged position. All of the foreigners here, as far as I'm concerned, are in a very privileged position. It's probably why you won't see, at least the media I've seen with foreigners getting interviewed, they don't look like, they're in a terrible state. I mean, they're eating, even if they've gone into a quarantine facility, their biggest annoyance was not being let out. It's not like they weren't getting food or they were treated poorly. They say the food was good. They say that they received very amazing treatment from the staff. So it's not ideal, I'll say that, but it's not the end of the world for some of us, especially.
Given your background as an American who probably values freedom a lot, personal individual freedom, and you're sort of like, you spend a lot of time in a culture where it's about the collective public good, over individual freedom. Is that something that you sort of get used to? But is there like a part of your American type of like, no, this is wrong, Like, how do you feel about this whole thing? Do you notice some sort of a change within yourself?
Well, I will say I didn't know about people calling out policies that they didn't like and being very vocal about that. I was very surprised when I saw that, because I also, even though I've been here for such a long time, I guess there's never been the need for such an uproar for one event where everybody's talking about something at once, and just seeing that people were not scared to come forward, that made me feel very good as an American. Like, yeah, you need to call out when something bad is happening and keep fighting for it until there's change. But I have seen like there's some occupation of certain like buildings and schools that are near people who have been in lockdown for a long time, and they're turning those into quarantine facilities. And that kind of made me feel like I was not very happy to see that, because it's like people who have been in lockdown for so long, they've been so careful, they're trying to get out of lockdown. And I just don't think that's fair, to be in lockdown for so long. And your release date depends on the number of cases around you. So people seeing that as a safety hazard and, not being able to get resolution to that, calling the police wouldn't help. There's like nothing they can do about that. So I didn't like seeing that. And I feel like there's definitely some illegal stuff going on that I hope is not legal anyway, like locking people inside of buildings. They really need to.
that's pretty dramatic. Like, yeah, you can't just like lock people inside.
That sounds to me like, there's like maybe too many cases, and they have no ability to control whether the people go out or stay in. So they're just like, oh, just lock it, so I don't have to deal with it. That's what it feels like to me when I see something like that. Maybe it's like property management or, the neighborhood committee. But I have seen people like call them and say, hey, this is not illegal. What if there's a fire? And then, them coming and taking those locks off. So I think people just need to like, I'm like, come on, like you can do it, like call, this is not right. You need to like, don't take it lying down. I've like talked to some foreigners about this as well. I'm like, talk to your embassy, try to get any type of resources you can. You should not be locked in a building. That is a fire hazard. That would be, terrible if there's a fire. Now you have to wait for someone to open the door. That would be devastating. So they really need to think about that.
Since you talked about before how you're sort of in this relatively privileged position as a foreigner, do you think that there are other people like old people who might not actually have access to food right now that are struggling? What are some of the other insight you could share with our sort of audience who might not be able to just get that authentic insight? I'm learning a lot, for example, from you, from speaking with you, but do you have any other insight that you wish that people knew about what's going on in Shanghai right now?
Yeah, so in terms of the elderly people, I know there definitely must be some that are not doing that well. I wouldn't be surprised if I saw a story of one. People who live alone, they don't have people to take care of them.
Right.
And, I say group buy. That involves knowing technology, using your phone, coordinating with your community members. So I would hope the elderly people who are in a community of people, the community is taking the because it's now the responsibility of the community. It's no longer just the government. The government is not like some big figure that can come and just wave a magic wand and fix things. Now it's like at the community level, it's the volunteers. It's up to people to help each other, give food to people who need it. I did see recently there's a phone number available now that older people can call. It's specifically geared at older people, and they can call it and have food delivered to them, and the food is a reasonable price. So I was very happy when I saw that, because you know, having to rely on technology, that's going to make it nearly impossible. I do know that some neighborhood committees as well, they've organized, you know, government food to go specifically to elderly people and disabled people. So people who are going to have a much harder time.
Lastly, you know, assuming that you get this period, you get through this period safely, do you still have plans to stay in Shanghai and China? Or do you prefer now, like, you know what, I think it's about time I went home?
I definitely am going to stay. So I've gotten this question a lot. And what I try to emphasize to people is I've been here for, I mean, eight and a half years. Almost, I mean, that's very close to a decade. And I've spent my adult life here. This is where I like found my career was started here. You know, I've built up communities with hundreds of people here. I've started a company here with a friend before. Like, this is home. This is home to me. It would have to get really bad for me to want to move. And in that case, I probably would not leave China. I would probably just leave Shanghai and move to a different city where things are being dealt with better. Because at least right now, and what I'm seeing, this is kind of more of a Shanghai issue rather than the entire city, because Shanghai cannot lock down as successfully as other places. But there are people who want to leave. I will say that.
Oh, there are people who want to leave.
They're ready. They're ready to go.
Thank you for sharing so much of your insight. I think this is exactly why we need to hear from the locals rather than having to rely on the media outlets. So, you know, I'm sure people will appreciate it. Some people will no doubt get political about this and then make this all about, like, you know, the China versus the US. But, you know, we just want to make sure that you're going to be okay. So please stay in touch. And then hopefully whatever update you get in the future, you come to us.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much. This was fun.
Okay. I'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Janice.
Thanks. Bye.